I can't believe you made me tell that joke. Now I'm in a shame spiral right now.
Yeah, it's all on record.
I don't feel honored. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Pre-Accident Podcast. I am your host for today. You can call me Todd Conklin because that is what people mostly call me. Well, there's other names. I definitely know there are other names, but that's the one that seems suitable and right for this podcast. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. If it's your first podcast, man, you're joining quite an exciting little community of thought. A lot of people listen and think and respond back, and as you guys know, you can always respond. Always drop me an email if you have comments. I got a bunch of comments actually this week I should probably talk about. Maybe I'll do that close to the end of the podcast. This podcast is going to be a pretty fun podcast. I'm actually really looking forward to all the joy and excitement that this podcast will bring to the world because, you know, that's what I do. That's my thing. That's my deal. And that's how I do it. You could hear by the beginning of this podcast. So this podcast is recorded. We're taking Sidney Dekker from San Ramon, California, the San Ramon Valley Conference Center, which is a place that's near and dear to my heart, where Sidney did a masterclass on just culture. And he had, I stepped in for a little bit. I wasn't able to go to it, but it looked like there were 30 people or so sort of surrounding him, and they were having a pretty raucous discussion around the idea of culture and defining culture. And actually they ended the class with kind of looking at and trying to create a sort of a culpability matrix-like thing for just culture, because the premise was the culpability matrix. James Reason's culpability matrix, you're very familiar with it, I'm sure, starts with the notion that the worker is guilty and then we prove the worker innocent. And in a just culture, it probably would be the other way around. You'd start by assuming all people are sort of equal and innocent, I guess, and then you would actually use the culpability matrix or this just culture matrix. Well, it doesn't really matter what we call it because they didn't get one done. But you'd use this ethereal matrix that lives in the sky to actually determine and think about justness. And it was a pretty good discussion, and out of it came the chance to actually take Sidney Dekker into his next meeting, which has a whole other associated story around it involving tugboats and changing schedules, and we can talk about that someday as well. But that gave us a couple hours in San Francisco traffic to chat, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to actually grab Sidney and talk to him about his new book. The new book is called The Safety Anarchist, and it's really interesting. It's probably worthwhile to kind of define the notion of anarchist early. He'll do it as well, but an anarchist by sort of a classic definition, if we look at sort of a historical definition of what people sort of determined that the word anarchist symbolizes, it really is a person who rebels against any authority, any established order, or any ruling power. And anarchists are different than anarchy. In fact, quite different. An anarchist is somebody who says there is another way. Now, they can actually push it towards anarchy, but that's kind of not what the book does. And so we got a chance to really sit down and talk about this in the back seat of a car, zooming. Well, I don't know if zooming is a word you could use in the Bay Area at 5:30 p.m. I think that's probably not a word you use. Parking on major roads, slowly moving 1 inch at a time towards San Francisco, which is what we did. And so there's a little car noise, but I think that's fine. I mean, it gives the podcast depth and character. And isn't that why we listen, for depth and character, both of those things? And they're both here, so it's the perfect podcast. We have a great conversation. It's interesting too, because if you've read the reviews on this book, for instance, on Amazon, the first review of this book is not terribly, what's the word, complimentary of Dr. Dekker and his writing. But I think on purpose he put that review in, and he's gonna talk about this review as sort of a way to build this case around the notion of pushing against power, of being an anarchist. And it's a bold move. It's a very good book. It's one of my favorites of all the books that have come out recently. I like this one a lot, mostly because I think it's a book that sort of talks towards the maturity of how this new view, the safety differently stuff, the HOP stuff that we're all working with, has kind of started having. And this is true because this summer in the United States at the ASSE meeting, they did the big sort of new view versus behavioral based safety, the thing between Scott Geller and I. And that was great and fun and stuff. But what it really indicates to me is kind of a mainstream acceptance of the new view. And what's interesting is as this mainstream acceptance becomes more and more, the notion that we are anarchists, I was going to say Antarctica, but that would be a slip. I can't even say it. Anarchists kind of goes away, because as this gains more and more traction in the sort of legitimate world of how people think about providing safe and reliable systems for everything, then the challenge will become in actually taking these ideas and using them to move the world forward. And that's kind of where this book is, if that makes sense to you. I think you'll find it very interesting. I know you'll find the podcast interesting. It's quite good. And that's kind of the blowdown of what's going on here. We're now deep in December and heading towards the end of the year and into 2018, which is somewhat unbelievable to me, but there's probably not much we can do to stop it. It's happening no matter what we think. And so this is a pretty good place to actually put this podcast, because if you're looking for some holiday reading, this might be something you could pick up and actually read. It's interesting and it's good, and I like it. I like it a lot. It's good. It really I like it because it kind of supports the things I've been most recently thinking about as it relates to workplace fatalities and the new book I have out. It's a really nice companion piece with that. It's a really good foundational sort of piece upon which you can build this idea around looking at serious injuries, fatalities, catastrophic failures, and all of those things. It's a great conversation, and we had a great time. And we successfully made it to San Francisco. And in case you're wondering, neither of us are driving. So we were even in the back seat. So we were in a really good place to have this conversation. And I think you'll like it. Listen carefully, because there's a lot of funny stuff in it, and I think you'll enjoy it. So this is Sidney Dekker, and he's talking about his newest book, The Safety Anarchist. And listen carefully, because I think you'll like it. I'll talk to you more. But until then, enjoy.
So Todd, I think one of the most difficult things of the Safety Anarchist is to try to find this balance, right? So I've been at this for 20-something years, and in the beginning it was real easy, because all I had to do was just be the rebel and contradict and be contrary and show a different way, and that was in some sense a recipe that was great to make some people angry, but also great to get some traction with these ideas. And now, 20 years into doing this stuff, some people are taking me for mainstream in this and follow this type of idea as the way to go. And in a sense, part of me has been trying to adapt to that role, which is no longer the rebel, but rather the sort of the authority that I used to make fun of and call their bluff. And here I am. And so part of me doesn't know how to behave. And I think the book, The Safety Anarchist, is clear evidence of that, because the sheer title is probably a bad idea. so I was challenged on this, though. Why not the safety heretic? Why the safety anarchist? And I mean, that actually has a substantive answer to it. A heretic is somebody who has a dogma to put in opposition to another dogma, and that's not what's going on in this book, right? The whole idea is that safety in a complex system is itself so complex that trying to close that off through dogma and rules and procedures that follow forth from that dogma is probably not a very useful way to make safety happen or to create safety in a system like that. So anarchism is, of course, very different from anarchy, but we can talk about that in a minute. But so when I got some feedback about these ideas, it actually showed, I think, quite dramatically how these ideas split groups, split the room, and create anything that doesn't resemble unity and harmony, but certainly creates debate. And so I have to read to you one of the pieces of feedback that I got. Well, two, actually, because they show the opposition. And so and they're actually on the back cover of the book now, which is pretty cool. I mean, I think that on part of the publisher, that's very cool. So the first one goes as follows. Having been a safety professional for 28 years, I am absolutely appalled at this man's attitude toward the safety profession. My work colleagues and I could not believe it when he referred to health and safety professionals as safety Nazis and to HR as human remains. Does this man honestly believe that 250 years after the Industrial Revolution, safety professionals have made little or no difference in reducing the risk of injury in workplaces? What a disgrace! And then he goes on to say that if a worker gets killed at work, he must still have been a good worker. Is he serious? I was absolutely gobsmacked at this comment. What a waste of money. Let's hope he never returns to our state. And so that was the kind of feedback where at least you've reached someone's heart and mind, I suppose, right?
Yeah, most people don't put that on the back of their book. I mean, you're bold.
Most people would not put that on. On the other hand, if I were to read that, I would go, that might be an interesting book.
Yeah, it's true.
But right underneath, here's other feedback. Best work on health and safety I have ever seen. Thoroughly researched, real-life examples, and common sense. Dekker avoids all the usual garbage and bureaucratise that is so counterproductive to safety and which completely bedevils the safety profession and regulators alike. Right? And so, now I cannot tell you or your listeners whom they should believe, but the fact that there's probably both. And so, but back to the original, the start of this, of my lamentation here, is this is probably not a very smart way to say I'm now part of the establishment, right? With a book entitled "The Safety Anarchist."
It's so interesting to me too. What is it that motivates you to write these? I mean, is this 15, 16? How many books is this for you?
I've honestly lost count because I don't really read them. I think 11 or 12, something like that. Yeah. So what motivates me to write this particular one, or to write in general? I love to write. I really like writing. It's one of these things where I lose myself. I lose track of time, and there's not always. Sometimes it's a chore, but certainly I love the activity of writing. But I, in all lack of modesty, assume that I've got something to say and to share, and that there is only a limited intellectual scholarly basis for what we consider safety differently or safety to, and I'm in a position where I can contribute to that basis for people to think differently about this stuff. And in some sense, I feel that very much as a responsibility to keep doing this and to keep feeding the thinking and the critique and the ideas that might one day replace what we today might see as common sense. And so that in general, when it comes to the safety anarchist, I part of me wrote this out of sheer disgust with the incredible over-bureaucratization of safety, as we've seen it in many domains. The fact that we have work areas now where 1 out of 10 people is watching what the other 9 are doing, right? Or even a worse ratio, 1 in 5 is watching what the other 4 are doing. The amount of money that we have invested in compliance activities and monitoring what other people are doing is mind-boggling. And so, if it were generating great results, then wonderful. You won't hear me. But as we all know, many industries have flatlined. Fatalities are not reducing in construction. They're not reducing in shipping. They're not reducing in a host of other industries. And so, apparently, the more bureaucracy and rules and compliance we throw at this problem, it's not getting smaller. It's not going away. And that is, you can put numbers on these things, and the amount of bureaucracy that we're throwing at safety has certainly more than doubled over the last 10 years in terms of rules and compliance demands, many of which are internal to the organizations themselves, by the way. And so I then go, well, hang on, there's got to be another way to think about this. As long as we keep doing more of the same, we'll keep getting more of the same, right? We're not going to get something different. There's not going to be a qualitative shift at some point where our system goes, oh, I've got so much bureaucracy now. All right, let me produce different results. Right? That's not going to happen.
The crazy thing, though, and this is what I think is so interesting, is that a classic anarchist would just want to tear the system down. Right? I mean, just burn her down. I mean, I don't know if you're following politics in the United States, but there's a little bit of that element of sort of tear the system down. What's interesting to me is that's really not your goal. You'll tear the system down, but only really to prove the bigger, more moral point, and that to me is what makes this book so interesting.
This is a beautiful, beautiful summary, actually. Thank you for flagging it that way, because you're right. That's not the kind of anarchism that I presume to advocate for in this book. Anarchism is very different from anarchy. Let's start there, right? Anarchy is a state of affairs. Anarchism is a set of ideas and ideals, right? So ideas and ideals about horizontal coordination, about bottom-up innovation, about listening to peers, about understanding that collectively we can solve problems better than some top-down structure. And you're right. I don't argue for safety anarchists as people who need to tear things down and throw bombs, because anarchism, in fact, has a very proud intellectual and even practical history that has got nothing to do with bomb throwing and tearing things down. In this case, I mean, anarchists or safety anarchists, in my book, are people who trust people more than process, right? Who rely on horizontally coordinating their experiences and their expertise, and want to innovate together from the bottom up. And yes, there are people who push back against inane or asinine compliance demands, of which we have enough. Right? Coercive compliance. You shall do this, otherwise you get fired. That type of thing. Right. And ultimately, I think people who are actively willing to recover the dignity of work as it is actually done by those who do it every day, rather than being told by those who don't do the work, and in some sense make rules not to make the life of people easier or safer, but make rules to protect themselves from liability. And so, we get so much in workplaces today where we ask workers to do things that do nothing to improve their work, that do nothing to enhance their safety, but that are simply in place to protect those they work for. And I think that's almost immoral.
I would agree. And that sort of leads me, this is a question of technique. So when you really do sort of rile somebody up, when you piss people off, what's your response to that? How do you manage that so that it becomes meaningful and forward moving and purposeful and mindful?
I think your question is pregnant with its own answer. It's a bad idea. This is why I'm not a consultant, right?
I'm not sure. I mean, I would I would actually suggest I don't think it is a bad idea, because I think it elicits passion, and it really breaks. The problem is that there's such a confirmation bias in this field to sort of see what we've always seen, and then to prove ourselves right by going out and finding the problems that we can point to and say, aha, that's what makes it wrong. I think that emotional charge, that pushing people to an edge where they're sort of beyond comfortableness, is actually a pretty important technique, and I think you use it quite well. I'm just curious, when's enough, and how do you take that and then turn it into ways to actually teach and share and grow and improve?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think the medium, and thanks for explicating that better. I think a book as a medium, you could easily argue that it's never extreme enough, because it really allows people and challenges them to think beyond the comfort zone, to push the thoughts all the way out there. And that doesn't mean that that's where everybody should be moving. That's probably a bad idea, but at least it shows the space for maneuver, right? As in the space that we could enter into and explore something of, only if only a small part of that space. And so when it comes to a book, which can be read at your own pace, which anyway is about the relationship between what's in the text and the reader, much more than the relationship between me and the text. Within that relationship between the reader and the text, all kinds of things happen. Ideas get born. People might get angry. They might feel very fired up and confirmed in what they already believed. Finally get someone else to put words on what they've always experienced. And so I think a book can fulfill all those purposes. If I'm and we've been in these settings together, right? If we're in a room full of VPs of an organization that has the potential to hurt people or has hurt people, then I won't call myself a safety anarchist. That's probably not very conducive to a discussion that leads somewhere. And so, given the audience, modulating the message definitely is the way to go.
I'm not sure you can, and I think I completely agree with you. I'm just not sure you can politely discuss something as passionate as sort of the definition of operational safety and have the same impact you can have when you basically call their baby ugly. And I think that's interesting.
No, you're right. You're right. And I always reserve, even in those discussions with VPs as we've had, that I reserve space in the discussion for staking out those positions. All right, and then qualifying them as don't believe a word of what I say, or this is very extreme. Of course, you're not going to go all the way. However, just let me show you how far this could be taken, right? That and then encourage some steps toward that. That's appropriate. No, you're right. You're right. And I am passionate about this. I do get upset with people who think that taking one particular moral position in this, or just punishing others, or more rules and procedures will solve it for them. That we actually sit on so much evidence that is not a very fruitful position to take any longer in many mature industries, that I do get passionate about that. And to be sure, it's not just a book of anger. I mean, there's a lot of intellectual history in it that thanks to guys like Bob Weers, who unfortunately passed away not long ago, but who got me onto the whole idea of authoritarian high modernism as what drives our, and that's a big word, but what it really means is that we've invested so much belief and confidence in centralizing control, in standardizing through procedures and rules, and in massive surveillance as the main solutions to how to solve the safety problem, that I felt compelled to dig into some intellectual history and say, so where have we done this before as humanity, and where does this actually come out of? Why does this make sense? Because the people who are behind the creation of those systems, they come to work to do a good job too, right, as they understand it. And so I certainly gave that lots of airtime, and so when you read the book, you will discover some of that intellectual history, why it makes sense for us to think that those modern approaches of centralizing and standardizing and surveilling is the way to create greater safety.
So what's next? You've got movie, you've got books, you do these great learning gatherings. What's next? Where are you going from here?
there's always the next book, and so because that's my commitment to my fan base, that I write them quicker than they can read them, and so
you and Stephen King.
But he actually can live off of doing that, and I can't, and so that's very unfair. I mean, not. I suppose it's unfair to me, not to him, but but the. But yeah, there is something to that. So a couple of things. One is we've, and this is in part encouraged also by earlier conversations you and I have had. There's an increasing desire to listen rather than read. And so the first audio book should come out very soon. The End of Heaven is now, we've recorded it. It's being sound engineered and should be out with Audibles very soon. And hopefully I'll get the rights for Safety Anarchist, the audio rights, very soon as well. And so those of you who don't want to read the Safety Anarchist, you can drive to work and listen to me blabbing it instead. And so, which is a wonderful challenge. So these are new things to learn from me, because you got to stay within a very narrow dB range in order to do an audiobook, right? So you can't go berserk, and you have to stage whisper and things like that. So that's cool. We'll be working on a new movie, but we'll talk about that later as well. And again, there'll be more books.
Gracias por su tiempo. Thanks for your time, buddy. Anything else? Any final words to the crowd?
I love you right back. I think that's what you would say, right?
Ti amo. I love you more.
I love you more. I love you more. No, keep reading and keep the faith. The obstacles to doing this thing well and thinking about safety differently and getting other people to gain some new insights in this, thinking about ways to create a just learning culture in your own organization. It's hard. It is hard. Nobody ever said it was going to be easy. But, and this is to all the listeners, right? If you don't do it, then who will? All right. So keep the faith. Keep at it.
Another podcast in the can. No, I don't. That sounds negative. On the computer. That's more of a digital thing to say. Wasn't that a good one? It was a great conversation. It was really fun to hear him talk about the thinking around the book and what the book means and what it says. It's a keeper. I mean, it's probably up there with the field guide. I mean, it's that good. And he's just dealing with the fact that you know, as these ideas become more and more accepted, that the transition that we make from troublemaker to problem solver is really an important transition. And I really appreciate something amazing about Dekker, and then I'll kind of quit gushing because I'm a little gushy. But it's his reliance on hope and optimism, I think, that I find most encouraging. And maybe that's because I think about him and I spend time with him and talk to him. But I hope you guys get that out of there too, because he's really an optimistic guy, and his dreams and aspirations for what the future means are built upon things like restoration and hope and really truth. The opposite of pain, whatever that is, and that's a really important way to think about sort of how Dekker moves through this. This was a fun podcast. It's definitely one that I bet you listen to a couple times for sure, because that's a good part of what's happening here. That's pretty much it for today. We could take it longer, but it's kind of hard to beat what he just said. It's a pretty good conclusion. Be brave, you guys. Be brave, be brave, be brave. I hope you get what you need. Have as much fun as you possibly can. Learn something new every single day. Bet you did today, actually. And for goodness sakes, be safe.
How many Kleenexes does one car need?
Your mouth.